Just to continue. So, and Paul, with his arms opened in the form of a cross, prays in the middle of the dungeon. As if he too were a servant, he's wearing a short dark robe with a little cloak and a hood, which he has thrust back in order to pray. Behind him are the two men he's named, dressed as he is, but much younger. When the prayer is over, Paul asks, "Where is Castulus?" On Plautina's lap, there, in the back. Paul cuts through the crowd and approaches the group. He bends over and observes. He blesses. He blesses the child and the matron. The child appears to have awakened at the cries greeting the apostle, for he raises a little hand, trying to touch Paul, who then takes his hand between his own and speaks. "Castulus, do you hear me?" "Yes," says the child, moving his lips with difficulty. "Be strong, Castulus. Jesus is with you." "Oh, why didn't you give him to me? Now I can't any longer." And a tear falls to aggravate his wounds. "Don't cry, Castulus. Can you swallow a single crumb? You can? Well then, I'll give you the body of the Lord. Then I'll go to your mother and tell her that Castulus is a flower in heaven. What should I say to your mother? That I'm happy, that I found a mother, that she gives me her milk, that my eyes don't hurt anymore. It's not a lie to say so, is it, to console my mother? And that I see paradise and my place and hers better than if these eyes of mine were still alive. Tell her fire doesn't hurt when the angels are with us, and that she shouldn't fear either for my sake or for hers. The Saviour will give us strength." A pause again. Castulus, the little martyr, is desperate to receive the Eucharist. If this were just plain bread, a mere symbol, why would he be bothered? And Paul is willing to give him a crumb so that Castulus will not die without having received the Eucharist. Clearly he was not allowed it before. Perhaps he hadn't been catechized. Maybe he hadn't been baptized. I suspect he'd been baptized because of his age, but he's not a child, not a baby. But he might not have been catechized and brought to the point where he could understand Holy Communion when Paul last saw him. But he's being offered a crumb. But that wouldn't be enough, would it? Well, Catholic doctrine, of course, about the Eucharist is that even a crumb is the entire Christ. And I might add, Protestants often say, oh, you just get the bread, not the wine. They get both. And we know that the Catholic Church, since the Second Vatican Council, has been giving communion under both kinds. But historically, it didn't. And there's no need for it to do so, because communion under one kind is reception of the entire Christ. And reception of not even the host, but a particle of the host is reception of the entire Christ. And this is affirmed here by St. Paul, who considers giving Castulus a crumb as sufficient to receive Christ. Paul continues, "Wonderful Castulus, I shall tell your mother what you've said. God always helps brothers and sisters. And you see this. He is a child. He is at the age when people can't bear the pain of a slight malaise. And you see and hear him. He is in peace. He is ready to suffer everything after having already suffered so much, provided he can go to the one whom he loves. And he loves him because he is one of those whom he loved, a child. And he is a hero of the faith. Take heart from these children, O brothers and sisters. I'm returning from having taken Lucina to the cemetery, the daughter of Faustus and Cecilia. She was only 14 years old, and you know how much she was loved by her family, and how weak she was in health. And yet she was a giant before the tyrants. You know that with these I pass myself off as a fossa, so that I can gather as many bodies as possible and lay them in holy ground. I thus live in contact with tribunals and see as I live in contact with the circuses and observe. And it is a comfort for me to think that I, too, in my hour, if God so pleases, shall be sustained by him like the saints who've preceded us. Again a pause. We know from the Acts of the Apostles that Paul was imprisoned in Rome, but he was able to receive guests, and that is how it was at the end of the Acts of the Apostles. And we know that's an early document because no mention is there of the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in AD 70. And so we can be pretty sure Luke was writing before then, both his Gospel, which preceded the Acts, and the Acts of the Apostles itself. But Paul had a second imprisonment at which he was finally executed. This is not that moment, and that accords with his statement that the pontiff is not with them, but he is alive. So this is the interregnum between Paul's first and second imprisonment, and he's free to move around. And we can see then there's not just preaching the faith that's going on by him. His going to Rome is very helpful to his fellow Catholics in Rome at that time, and I do not hesitate in calling them Catholics. There's no point in pretending, using some ecumenical term like Christians, which was useful in the old days, but now can mean almost anything.